Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this, focus on revisiting the SSI principles from 2016, and with the goal of updating them and presenting them, hopefully first at the global. I always get the name of that particular one wrong. GDC, but it's like whenever I see GDC, it's the Game Developers Forum, which is not quite
Uh,
the same.
global
Yeah,
digital
there
collaboration.
it is.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
you got it.
It's an invite-only event in Geneva, although I do have the ability to invite some people if there are people who want to attend. Um, I see we have one more person. Let me quickly send the Google Doc. To the Google chat. So anyhow, we currently are expecting to have a session there on this topic, whether or not it's just a presentation of our collective discoveries and thoughts and a new draft, or something panel oriented or not, is still open at this point. The um, Yeah, so let's just do a quick round of introductions, if you don't mind. Also just putting your name and maybe your contact information, uh, if you want others to be able to reach out to you. Um, Otto, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and maybe say something a little bit about why do you care about self-sovereignty, and what's important to you that brings you back today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm with the Ethereum Foundation. We work in the public sector team. We're a recently formed team and also long time fan of decentralized identity. I believe I care about it because I worry about surveillance capitalism and the dangers from that, and what has been involved over that. Um, First, was very impressed with uh, generally how blockchain and identity were very important puzzle to solve back from like when ID 2020 days was evident, but I guess now more recently with this whole surveillance capitalism industry out there, that definitely we need SSI to happen in reality. And yeah, that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself a little and maybe a little your thoughts on SSI, pro and con, or
Oh, yeah. So Lisa Dussault at the Data Transfer Initiative. Although I've been involved in standards and privacy for many, many years, mostly at you'll frequently find me at IETF meetings and in IETF mailing lists. Um, I was certainly aware of the SSI principles closer to the time that they originally came out. So it's exciting to be able to contribute to things have changed in decade plus. That just happens, right? So it's a great time to be revising them.
Thank you. Wilmer?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I'm Wilmer, sorry. I'm the creator and the co-founder of My One Place, which is a startup, and we are trying to build an identity layer and compliance for the tokenized world, so tokenization of real world assets. So, of course, I'm in the intersection point of why I care about identity. So that's like I would say the business side of things, why I'm interested in. But I also have like personal, really real personal convictions of why I care about this, because for me it's all about giving opportunities. And when you are given only one path, you cannot choose, right? So it's all about freedom, to do good or to do bad, hopefully to do good. And for me, SSI is like a way of, in the world that it's gonna come with these old technologies, we need to choose, right? We need to have technologies that allows us to have freedom of choosing one path or another, and not to be locked in, not to be forced to do things other people tell us to do. So for me, that's really, really important.
Thank you. Gerald?
Hello, Gerald Glickman. Thrilled to be here. Yeah, I've been in fraud and identity risk management predominantly in a financial services context here in the United States for 10 or 11 years at this point. And yeah, have been just coming at this from a practitioner's lens, kind of building and leading fraud teams and to support the private and public sector, as well as working on the policy and regulatory kind of overlaps. And yeah, have just come to this space looking for better ways to determine if people are who they say they are, and increasingly have been kind of aware of and grounded to kind of the moral imperative, having built and deployed these systems that make errors on both sides, feel a strong kind of moral pull to make sure that we get this right and amplify the tools and policies that are going to get it done.
Thank you. Paul, I don't see you in the Google Doc, but you want to introduce yourself? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Paul, currently affiliated with University of Vienna. I'm mostly interested in the application of SSI in the context of social media, so alternatives, more decentralized social media ecosystems. So I'm active in authenticated transport protocol and ActivityPub development aspects. Yeah, been advocating for SSI for some time now, and still like the concept a lot. And I appreciate your initiative here. Revisiting this is, I think, very important.
Thank you. Andre, I see that you had sound issues. Have you been able to get it to work? I would say since I'm not hearing you, probably not. Let us know if you want to introduce yourself or just put a little note in the thing. So, what I chose these principles to start with. Oops. Technical principles to start with, partly because of an experience that I had with trying to revise the principles, 8 years ago. We started at the top and we never got past existence. And even I note, here, if you go to the beginning of this Google Doc, there's just, a huge amount of comments and everything in these first sections. So, also, I've clearly added some new items, but these technical principles were um, um, already there. Relatively, I felt like they all had a pretty good start. And but we also have a lot of experience. We have, 9, 10 years experience with it. By the way, if people don't have the URL handy for this Google Doc, it's here. Um, so I thought we'd go over these briefly. Um, a key thing about the technical principles is that they're the most operationalizable, if that's a proper word. Was at a meeting recently where somebody was basically complaining that, these other companies were whitewashing SSI. And, they were saying, they aren't really self-sovereign. They just sort of use some of the language and, it's hard for a buyer or, government agency or somebody else to basically go, yes, it actually is self-sovereign. So I think there's an opportunity with the technical principles to at least begin to put a line in the sand that says this side is necessary. Um, the other thing is that I also am a little concerned about the other side of this, which is, I think you can maybe fulfill all of the operational principles and still not, you'd still defeat the spirit. I mean, we're seeing, a variety of national, DIDs and such, which kind of like it's not decentralized, it's web-based. Is it really SSI? I would say no, it's not. But they're using SSI stack and decentralized identifiers and other stuff there. So I think there's this thing on one hand, getting the technical side down makes it possible to do checklists, but checklists aren't necessarily enough. Um, so, the specific example I give is that a, identity system that claims persistence but fragments the person, or portability that doesn't survive vendor lock-in, interoperability that collapses into monoculture, and minimization that excludes inferred data, or transparency of code without transparency of incentives. Just feels like those are all problems. Um, so any before we dive into the comments and stuff, any first thoughts on the principle on the sort of this subcategory of the operational principles?
Maybe one question that I have, Christopher, about that is, what are the other categories, right? You're talking about the operationalization, but what are the other categories you're referring to?
Well, the first category are the foundational principles, which tend to be more ethical or philosophical in some ways, although some of these may be operational, but they're more more fundamental. Um, then we have what I call the relational principles, which is how people interact with the system, which often is less operational, but I think there are other kinds of checkoffs. We can say there's a law that basically says this, or there is some kind of enforcement mechanism that says that, this association, this collaboration, the consent or whatever is there. Um,
My
uh,
question was because maybe this is not at all, pertinent, but my intuition is that at the end, what people are going to have in hands are the operational principles. So as much as possible, we maybe should make sure that other kinds of not basically easily operational principles are enforced into them. Maybe we can have like a framework or something saying, okay, these are the basics. These are other ones that are philosophical, etc. And you have like a meta or something in the middle that actually enforce those into the operational. Because either you have something like that, or either all of them tends to be operational, should be operational. Because at the end, this is what actually companies or standards are going to do, right? What is operational. So maybe there's a proxy to be thought about is like the other principles, how to enforce them and how to relate them directly into the operations so we can make sure that these things are respected as well.
yeah.
Respect.
So I encourage I sent this link out on the list, but I really liked this paper by two Japanese researchers, Charnyan Padian and Toshiaki Oki. Um, and it basically, they did a deep dive into the original principles, but also a variety of other aspects of the compliance to the to these things. So, they including some other variants of the principles that have come out since that time. But in particular, I think there's some really good stuff here. Is at the bottom. If I can find the bottom, let's see. Deny non-essential. Of course, make me start all over. Um, At the bottom is this supplemental items item thing here, which includes a number of spreadsheets, and I found them fascinating. So I will just show you an example. So they basically took all of the various kinds of requirements. Some of them came from the decentralized community, some came from the principles, etc., and tried to divide it into which of these are security and which of these are privacy oriented. So there are some interesting aspects there. And then they basically applied that to this part where they basically ended up with 42 operational principles. But more of, and it's hard to see, in this form, but one of their pages had an interesting page that basically said, these are the items that are not operational. And there were a lot. And I looked at them and I think there were three things I observed from the ones that they couldn't puzzle out. Um, One was that some of them really were um, not operationable because um, they're part of the system, sort of, the systemic controls, some of which, smart contracts and other kinds of mechanisms, but just simply laws and regulations or how organizations work with each other can become checkboxes. Is there something um, that meets that requirement? So that was the first thing that I observed from it. The second thing was, I think that this ended up pulling up some interesting um, things where maybe there's a balance, like too much of this one can result in problems with this other one. So I felt like there were some things there. But also, there's just some fundamental things where, I'm here because I believe in human rights and dignity. And as we move more and more online, that dignity really is much easier to become other, rather than me talking. I mean, I'm already, disintermediating. We're using Zoom here. Um, I have my camera on, other people don't, but no matter what, you still don't get eye contact. That's the actual, I, in a sense, that's what's going to trigger your ape brain to basically say there's a person on the other side. So we already have some things that are distancing us as people. Digital technologies make that even worse. And I might argue that AI technologies have that same risk. So how do we keep that? And that means we have to kind of believe in some fundamental philosophy and um, we have to believe that dignity is a worthwhile goal for everybody, not just dignity for the few, I think is maybe. Um, so, if we're really explicit about where that is, then that's a good thing. But does that mean that, we have four sets of principles? I don't know. I'm not sure that the current 16 quite, and the division that I have in the current 16 quite cuts it, but at least it's a start. Does that help? Any other Otto? You're also kind of being part of the W3C side of things. There is the whole operational discussions there. Any
Um,
thoughts?
yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I really like the graphic from um, the one I shared in the chat, which is like the high level overview of all of those principles, but on like the colored way where you have the foundation principles and then you have like these like privacy issues and all the other categories. I mean, obviously I had like decentralization, but I believe that is a very good way to frame it. And yeah, we have discussions in the W3C, the ID group. Actually, Wilmer participated in a couple of our last calls. Um, but yeah, I mean, in my DID world, I guess things get down to operation on people using specific DID methods uh, that are hopefully adhering to these principles and optimizing for various of the uh, kind of the categories, or optimizing for more one security aspect versus others. But yeah.
So Any other uh, especially some of those people that are kind of dealing with the KYC and that side of the world, have any comments around kind of the technical principles and how do a lot of people are going, well, SSI is fundamentally, anti-KYC. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. It's a balancing act, but anybody
Yeah,
have any?
maybe because I'm really interested, sorry, in KYC and stuff like that in our company. So one of the things we're asking ourselves is, um, what if, for example, you start to have like credentials about your identity, your legal identity, stuff like that, because the convenience of having these frameworks makes them reusable, you know? Donc, people, for example, a social network can ask you, for example, these kind of attestations, right? And one of the things we're saying is like, at which point we should also enforce context. For example, I'm saying something like you shouldn't use credentials that are used in in relations with, for example, financial institutions like KYC, for example, to something like social media. You shouldn't, because then you can abuse those kind of things, you know. So one of the aspects I'm also eager to know about SSI is how we also prevent this abuse of context and this commingration, you know, this mixing of context that will end up in something like an utopia, right? You shouldn't. The question is, should we allow the user even if he or she wants to do so, right? But in theory, also today we don't have the means, you know, to reuse those kind of information. Tomorrow we're gonna have, for example, KYC attestations in the wallets. Then what happens when social media will say, okay, I will give you this service until you do that. And we all know that human people sometimes do stupid things, you know, we click on things we don't without reading and stuff like that. So should SSI principles and the operational ones, make sure some constraints that are actually already existing constraints in our real world, but they can kind of tend to disappear once SSI is implemented. One of the examples I give you is the friction of not being asked financial information when you are creating an open a social media account. So that's just one example. One of the thoughts we're asking ourselves for KYC and the hybridation and integration with these principles about that.
Yeah. Gerald, I know you're kind of dealing on that side of things as well. What are any observations or thoughts?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the primary issues around reusable credentials in a financial services or KYC context are predominantly around the economic incentives of the identity verification industry. And I know that firsthand. As well as kind of the underlying trust model and framework for financial institutions to be able to rely on attestations related to identity proofing. So I think there's some good work kind of being done in the latter part. The first part is kind of more fundamental. But to Wilmer's point, like I also do worry about kind of the Jevons paradox piece of this, where if we realize this has to be easy. Yes, we want to empower individuals, but as a part of developing and advancing these standards and policies, we have to make sure that we don't end up in a place where it's just because something is easier to do, it's happening more often, which I think is exactly what Wilmer was getting at. So I don't know if we need to consider policy constraints or if that can be addressed in the principles itself, but I think that is a very valid concern. And I'm hopeful that private industry will continue to care for kind of the normalization of like the attestations being made in a KYC context. The bar is actually pretty low. If you look at the Bank Secrecy Act and Customer Identification Program requirements, it's more about kind of normalizing how financial institutions assemble, share, and rely on these claims bank to bank.
Of course, then there's the whole inference problem. Once you have that first attestation and then now they become bundled. And I mean, it's the
Correct.
old thing like here in the United States, a lot of times credit history, ends up being used for by job um, to, by employers around jobs. So, is there a one-to-one mapping between your credit history, which may have a lot of things having to do with a variety of circumstances beyond your control, or a partner, or whatever, and your ability to get a job? No, there's some problems here when those are become strongly correlated, and this is um, increasingly a problem. The other thing I haven't heard here on the KYC thing is that I often see the problem is and I don't know if this is a something that as you say, the ID verification industry, which is become a big industry with lots of money in it and such. Um, if it's something that they're using to capture, but it's a liability question. It's like, a long time ago, I remember talking, I think it was with Wells Fargo, it might have been Bank of America, but, part of the thing that they, since they have huge departments that are doing KYC, all this kind of stuff anyhow, and then there's this little bank in Wyoming that I use that has absolute, God, it was so scary giving them the KYC information. And their comment is, well, Wells Fargo isn't going to give it to us, A, because they don't want to have the liability for it, and they don't, and then B, that they don't want us stealing customers from them, even though we're a little tiny bank only chartered in Wyoming, which has fewer people than most cities in the United States. I don't know. Any thoughts on the capture and or liability side of on this?
I think as your work has taught me, Mr. Allen, like context is king. I think it depends on the nature of the claims and the domain in which they're being relied on. But there's probably some things that we can learn from like the formalization of liability around like X509 certs and how that stuff was handled and is handled. But yeah, beyond that, I think private industry or like industry working groups are going to have to provide some of the middleware here to kind of normalize the expectations and liability caps for some of these things in financial services.
Okay. So before we dive into these, any last comments about kind of the big picture? Okay. So I thought I'd go into so Otto, I see that you added to, so persistence, obviously there is the original definition, identities must be long lived. And then, the old one, said identities should last forever, or at least as long as the user wishes. And I know I'm going to be doing a global search and replace and get rid of user, but I wrote that extra thing there kind of in response to what are the bad things about persistence? I mean, persistence is, leads to correlation, etc. Um, so I tried to do that. So these were the original things, and then Otto, you had said um, made a comment that this particular phrasing in the original makes it harder for federation and consortium run registries to be SSI washed. You want to explain that a little bit more, or?
Yeah, I mean, so like my suggestion there just goes in line with this persistence, and I think the other one where the statelessness aspect that you had mentioned in one of the other ones. And I think if we try to say that the infrastructure itself should not be dependent on, a single issuer, vendor, or jurisdiction or consortium, then that makes it more a better chance of kind of being persistent itself, right? Obviously, it is aspirational, but I think it would make it harder for some of these like federated and consortium run registries where censorship can, just be done by collusion, this would be a better way of aspiring to having an infrastructure that.
I would say there's also a connection to portability in this, which I think is something that Lisa raised. We'll go into that in a minute. This is what I added, mostly because I felt like, this is some of the stuff that, gives some reasons in it that have emerged in the last 10 years. However, is this a good expression of it? I mean, how much of this is not operational? Any thoughts on these additions?
I like your additions. I would actually then suggest, if okay with you, I move my sentence towards the end of your green text so that way it's more complementary to what you're already saying.
Sure.
So that way, yeah, like maybe I'll just you can go ahead and move it, or if you want me, I can.
Yeah, let's see what see how do
Yeah.
I want to keep the comment.
Yeah, perfect.
Good. Okay, that kept the comment. Okay. And that is an addition. Just gonna underline it for right now. So operationalizing this, if we go to the let's see, where do they put the persistence? It must be here. Here it is. So an SSI must, persist identities forever, or at least as long as they are required by the user and necessary for fulfillment of purpose. Now, some people kind of go, well, wait a second, this is, what about, a lot of the criticisms of the right to be forgotten, and, do I have to forget you when you've been a bad actor, type of problem. I don't know that we've, here's something that they said, until they become obsolete or the asserted authority ceases to exist, or something around at what point does a system um, yeah. Oh, so Andre uh, commented, as we're not even necessarily financial records are kept forever. I know every 7 years I'm throwing away all the records for my 8-year-old financial stuff, except for like real estate and a couple of other special categories and stuff. Um, um, again, am I properly capturing for the purposes for which they were created have been fulfilled, but then like who decides, um, when it's been fulfilled? I know this is another category in the liability thing. A lot of people, basically go, well, it says for any business purpose. Well, my business purpose is I don't want to be sued. So I'm going to basically keep all this until I can't be sued, and then I forget about that. I have, I can't be sued anymore because of statute of limitations, but I've forgotten about it because that was 7 years ago. Um, 5 years after account closure. That's interesting. Yeah. So, this is the other side of things. I find that a lot of the systems don't aren't really clear on what is truly sensitive or correlatable. I mean, some people might argue everything's correlatable. I don't know.
Maybe if I can say something that is coming to my mind about these different points in persistence is like we lack this notion of context, right? Maybe, for example, if within context you cannot share things and they cannot be correlated, maybe what defines until which person has the right, or what is the finality, for example, of having this data persistent, and who has the right to revoke it or to delete it, maybe it's on the context, right? Because when you have a relationship with a bank, or I don't know, with any service, it's always an interdependent relationship. Not everything is of you, and not everything is of the financial institution. So I think we can have like a nuance in this persistence part. If we have context, for example, where a context for a persistence use case is going to be something more towards the user, it will have more control to the user because the context demands it. In, for example, I don't know, with the police or with the government, or because you accept the terms and condition of a service, then you give more rights over the persistence. You do relegate or donate these rights, or more rights to this persistence, to the institution. And for me, that should be something that is too free to you to choose again, but independent of the context. We cannot apply like these persistence rules of homogeneous way for every single data persistence. You can have like a notion of context, and between context it can change, and context cannot have relationship between each other, because that's basically what we're doing today, right? You have an email, for example, for your job. You have an email for, I don't know, for family and friends. You have a social media tags and things like that, and those are contexts. And the only point of contact is you, in your mind and in your identity. You don't have like a real world tied to it between those contexts. And I think it can, it can bring nuance to what is persistence and what are the needs for persistence. Maybe in some cases persistence need to be automatically deleted, because there's a legal, I don't know, legal stuff that say this data cannot be any longer stored there, so it's maybe automatically gone, right? Sometimes it's up to the institution, sometimes it's up to the user. Maybe it's a multi-party thing that is going to govern the persistence, and everyone should agree on how to govern that. So maybe it's too complicated. I don't know. That's, again, for me, it's all about context as well in that part.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm complicating things. I don't know.
No, I think that there's a clue here in the sense that, so the original persistence thing, I think, way back when came out, mostly because of, you know, cancellation of identifiers. Um, and then kind of this mix of an identifier also. I mean, like, I'm Christopher A at Gmail, and I've got, I was one of the first users of Gmail, so I have, I think, 1.5 terabytes of email that I don't actually control and can be taken away from me the first time somebody complains that I'm violating, some, oddball provision of some oddball section of Google. They can just basically say, I mean, this has happened to people. Um, I actually am part of this. We call it the Smart Friends list, and it's basically a number of ex-Apple and ex-Google people. And, every few months we get somebody, says, well, my buddy has, lost all of their account stuff and has no recourse at Apple or no recourse at Google, and we are kind of the back channel to fix these. But, we fix 4 or 5 a year, and it's like, what about the rest of the world, who doesn't have a back channel? Um, Anyhow, I also feel like there's this connection to portability. So there were more comments on portability. Grace, let's see, that's more of a language thing. Portability. Um, Portability must also apply to the surrounding narrative, reputation. Again, it's kind of like we've got a context thing that's been grafted in here that maybe we need to separate out in some fashion. Um, And then there's the statelessness question here. But his comment is this is a law on migration, not a technical one. There is. Am I when Google cancels my Christopher A at Gmail and without any kind of recourse, that's not exactly statelessness. Um, um, but on the graph of this is trivial and this is statelessness, it's on there somewhere. Um, Lisa, you've been dealing with the portability aspects of things. And maybe, like one of the things I'm really unclear also is, there's portability and then there's um interoperability. And my gut says there's an important difference between those two, but they're also interlocking as well. It doesn't do you any good if to have portability without interoperability, and I don't know that it does you any good to have interoperability without portability. So I don't know. I mean, is it one?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I did put a comment in the side in this section there. About the one suggestion I had, if you want to be maximalist about this, is that I'm not sure reputational context really conveys to people who aren't like living their lives thinking about data portability, that all of my photos on Instagram, all of my posts on Mastodon, or all of my knitting projects on Ravelry, they all constitute my identity on those platforms. Your identity is what you've contributed on many platforms. And so being unable to move being unable to move my photos off of iCloud means that I can't move my identity off of iCloud.
Yeah, you also mentioned like, one of the other risks was how limited your choices might be,
Yeah.
even if you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the way this works in practice these days is the EU is putting pressure on companies to do data portability, but the wording of the regulation plus the orneriness of those companies means that they're interpreting it in a way of like, oh, you need a data export package. And so we know what you need for data portability. The language of the it says you have to send the person's data where they want it to go. And so they took that as, oh, we need to do something different than a reasonable access API and actually send a data package to somebody else, just shove down the wire the things we think they need. And so it's often an extremely broken setup for the actual practice of this. I just tried to export my Goodreads information last night so I could set Claude loose on 1,000 books I've read and written about, right? But I can't export my Goodreads stuff to any service that can ask for it. And I can only petition Amazon to sometime in less than a month send me an export of
Yeah.
1,000 books. This is like really unusable. And I, in some cases it's certainly intentional that they've made it unusable. In some cases it's just, it's not their highest priority, and therefore they end up with something just sort of reverting to the what's the phrase? It reverts to the common, reverts to the
Right.
mean, and the mean is pretty unusable. But then even when it's made a little better, the companies often really limit its use. Yes, the user might be able to export their own data with a link and email that they can use to download in under a month. But if a third party wants to get that data directly, they have to be approved by each of these large companies. And going through Google's approval process is different than Meta's. Amazon's and Apple's are much more stringent and demanding and slow. They're very slow to approve companies asking for access to these personal data APIs. So one DTI has been promoting two strong concepts for that. One is these companies should not be running their own trust verification. Apple should not decide who I can get to print my baby photos. Google should not decide who I get to view my calendar or help me manage my schedule. Meta should not decide which research projects I can donate my personal data to and which ones Meta doesn't like and they won't be listed. So we want those decisions about who is trustworthy to be in the hands of a neutral third party that won't look at anti-competitive reasons for rejecting them. And then the second thing we're really pushing is that we think data access is data access. You can't put your data donation package in one place and your personal data export in another, and your third-party API access in a third place, because people will go to whichever channel gets them what they need and, try to fool the system about whether they're doing it for research data donation purposes or personal export or third-party usage. And data portability, you can't just decide what package another company needs and drop it on them. An ask approach, traditional web REST API, good practice is actually what's needed here, so that whether the authorized third party is looking for a data donation, a backup, or to third-party access for additional features, or moving your account to another place, the one we care about specifically for identity, they should have access to the same API and the same authorization flow, and then use it as they need to. So that we suggest that interoperability and portability are the same. Otherwise, it tends to be broken. Portability.
Okay. Anybody?
Sorry
any
if that
other-
was a bit of a screed.
No, it's perfect. That's what we need. I am, as I've been rewriting, as I've been, viewing these, um, um, you know, they were separate, I think, for different reasons back when, and increasingly, I think they're less separate today. And I don't quite, know how to completely articulate it. And again, I think that there was this difference between, the context of your identity and the identifiers. So that was, why they were separate. Any other thoughts on this? Maybe, especially from the KYC side of things and the financial information and such. I get very frustrated that, almost everybody I know is violating the toss of their banks and everything else because their wife, their secretary, their child, or whatever has the passwords for things because otherwise they can't, their lives are intertwined and they can't intertwine their access. So they, give their partners access because they have to because their lives are intertwined.
People end up giving their Google passwords to startups for reasons as simple as, and I can't believe this, going through email to look for things you've purchased so that you could resell them. I have a friend who's doing that startup, and she says people actually give her startup their Google password to trawl through their email for retail purchases.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of stuff I said we need to be careful because I mean, the premise is maybe the self is sovereign, and sovereign means autonomous, but means loyal and lofty and and sensible. And this kind of behaviors show that we don't, we aren't. So, yeah, I mean, sorry, I just I found that crazy.
Well, this is, I'm a big fan of a lot of the object capability approaches to authorization. And I know GNAPS tries to do it, and I know there's a ZCAPS thing at W3C. I have my own cryptographic OCAPs, which are a variant of things that have some pros and cons. But the basic idea is that, you give somebody a subset of your capabilities to do something and yet, still keep the security. So I can give my office manager access to my bank account details but not the ability to send a check. I when I look at it, it's like, the banks aren't incentivized to make that easy for a variety of reasons. Although I will say I've been very impressed with Mercury Bank, which is a neobank. So they don't even own, it's not really a bank. They have a relationship with the bank, but then they're the complete front end for a bank. And Mercury now has I can give my CPA and a separate access. Um, I can give individual cards to each employee and them be able to see all the data for their cards, their purchases and upload invoice, upload the receipts and all this kind of stuff. And they just added a couple of weeks ago, I haven't played around with it yet, a an MCP server. So I'm kind of like, this will be interesting to see how that works with my AI. But part of the reason why they're doing it is they're perceiving, at least among certain groups of people that are on the leading edge. They're the bank. They want to be the bank for the leading edge people. But will that be sufficient to protect grandma? I don't know. Um,
Anyway, I love the section on portability and the whether the reputational context was um, put enough things in scope was my only suggestion for it.
okay. On interoperability, let's see where that was this one. Yeah, so I had hoped that Sarah Garcia could be here. She's in Europe, so it's a little harder for them. Evening time, but she wrote some she was co-author of a very interesting paper looking at SSI from an EU principles I mean, I think she might argue that the UD wallet and some of the other types of initiatives, are fundamentally, at odds with, some of the EU legal principles. Um, um, so yeah, she's basically saying there's this blurring of legal identification with things that don't require legal identification. I mean, age verification is becoming, the big bugaboo now. I mean, that's just EFF and others have talked a lot about that. Um, what is Goal is pluralistic interoperability, many coexisting vocabularies, trust networks, including the right to remain outside, bridged by open protocols rather than a unified standard. Um, well, this is interesting. So Grace, she's the new executive director of DIF, says, um, you know, the right of the individual to determine the authorities they believe in. I mean, this goes back to when I did SSL and then later TLS 1.0, the whole point was, you could decide which certificate authorities to trust. And if you only wanted to trust the certificate authority that had a private eye, go in and actually, testify that business actually has an office and has officers that are real people and whatever. You could use that CA for all your business online. And then, of course, that all became, consolidated. So by like 2011, 2012, there was only a few companies that could even offer it. And then the browser companies went, well, we don't care. We actually get to decide. And then CAs became worthless, and it was pretty much up to the browser companies. So yeah, we don't get a choice to decide, who has authority over our contexts.
But is this pluralistic interoperability view, I mean, in a way recognizing like, yeah, we're going to have the roots of trust from nations. Yes, we're going to have roots of trust from private sector. And then we're going to have like these self-sovereign, like, I guess, human-based
Yeah,
roots
peer to
of
peer.
trust in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it may not be expressed well enough, but yeah, that's the um, I'm very interested in, obviously a lot of the work I do is in peer-to-peer trust, and especially peer-to-peer trust under adversarial circumstances. I mean, I have, people in Iran that I hope are using some of the technology that I wrote for them a few years back right now. And um Yeah, how do we deal with that? Before we go on, any other thoughts on portability, interoperability? And is Lisa right that maybe we need a new term for this or just collapse them somehow? Or is there some good reason why they're separate?
I have one comment, maybe no in directly to your question, but is in link to that is like we need to be mindful about relationships, right? For example, when we create data, is our data, but we're creating it through a service or through a tools, right? So I think that should be acknowledged and it should be taken into account because you were talking, for example, Lisa, about the example of the pictures in Instagram, right? Those pictures are already in your phone, for example. You could argue that and you freely submit it to the platform, right? So I think in that term of interoperability and portability, we need to be mindful about the relationship of the data we are creating towards the institution of the service or the tool that it's being used. In yeah, I mean that's because, for example, the example of Instagram was like a huge example, and also as an informatician, I think about coding this stuff and creating a platform where everyone can take out and in the data whenever in any format is really cost and then we start to hit barriers in the real world with how it works, right? Everything has a cost, so we need to be careful about the cost, the reality, the possibility of feasibility of things, and also the relationships we create the data, because this data is not created in isolation, right? It's created always with an institution through a tool with a service that is given to us.
Yeah. I mean, it's been interesting to me. I mean, um, so spent a bit of time trying to understand, what's going on with some of the AI stuff. And one of the new things that's kind of happened with AI is that I'm caring less and less about schemas. And I just let my tool, I basically say, this is this, this is that. They don't need to be unified. Just make the two of them work together. And it does all of its stuff and it tends to work. Now that's not accessible to regular people right now, but it is getting easier and easier. So I don't know. I don't know what the consequence of that is. You have any thoughts on that, Lisa, or we have a new person, Kemal. Um, Otto?
Uh, mm, No, no, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think there's a new comment there by Andre on the interoperability right at the beginning. He just
All
maybe
right.
you have better way to.
Yeah, there's this whole aspect of, you know, I I don't know how many I keep on threatening to go through my password thing that, automatically populates every time I give a new password to a new place. Like how many of those places that I ever never really did do anything? I just went there once to take a look at one thing and they made me get an account. And now I'm there. Like, how long should those last? Which maybe is a good segue into minimalization. The original thing was disclosure should be minimized. Uh, but you know, now I'm even more concerned about correlation resistance and that small voluntary disclosures become inferred. I mean, it's already cleared, even though I have a lot of protections on my account um around cookies and other different types of things, but through DNS tools and various things, it's pretty easy for a system, even on a totally anonymous you know new private session, to recognize that I'm no longer in my 20s and start giving me advertising and other different types of material that implies that they know something about me just from my behavior. Um, and This is another one where I also kind of, from a KYC perspective, it's like, why can't I just make a commitment to a party, a fair witness, a notary, whatever the appropriate thing is, that such and such exists, but not actually give it to you until you have proven that, you have a right to or a need for that, because of a bad transaction or misuse of principles and things of that nature. Um, um, I mean, actually, Shannon and I wrote up a internet draft, and to talk about data minimization as a possible thing to start standardizing in the ITF. And we were, did this as part of a plenary session called Dispatch, where we were not scheduled against any other session. So in theory, everybody at IETF that meeting could watch it. And we basically said, hey, you've got this RFC on human rights, and you have this RFC on privacy. They may not be standards, but they're RFCs and they're principles. Why aren't you, applying? They both say you should be doing data minimization. We should start doing some standards around data minimization. And the response was, well, there's no demand for that. And I'm like, I mean, Lisa, by any chance, were you there for that session at IETF, that dispatch?
I don't believe I was. Was that last ITF or
No,
previous one?
it's now, I think it's
Montreal?
about a year now. So,
Yeah, no, I haven't had the budget to go to every ITF meeting for the
yeah,
last couple of years.
me either.
I think I missed it.
But yeah, I mean the thing was that it was like, well, we don't have companies that are demanding standards around how we do data minimization and what are the techniques and best practices of data minimization. Since we don't have anybody asking for that, we're not going to do it. And I'm kind of like, what? Oh, and this is where I'm being told, well, those human rights and privacy things don't have any um, they're not standards, thus we don't necessarily have to use them, which is why did anyhow, you get my drift. Um, any thoughts on minimalization? Minimalization, which is a little slightly different.
I think my interest here is less on the principles and more on the policy side, like
Right.
in financial services and KYC. The law is collection and storage of the PII. Would love to, be able to point to tools and advance the narrative that like, hey, like we can actually accomplish this without actually revealing and needing to store all of this information. But I think it's a bit more of kind of the circular kind of causal loops of like capabilities informing policy is kind of a big part of why we're at where we're at right now. That has kind of kept the window closed here.
Yeah, I'm hoping I can find some good way to express this. I'm literally going two completely different, very small intersection, but on the same topic. One at Georgetown Law next week in DC on using the new technologies around disclosure, having to do with KYC and all the financial requirements and all that type of stuff. And uh, I still don't. I mean, I think it's great that these two things are happening. I'm not seeing a way out of, because somebody's going to basically go, well, the law says we have to keep this information, and to keep it means we actually have to have it, and that we'll be liable if we don't. And until that's fixed, I don't know how to solve the problem.
I don't think we have to solve the problem, though. This paper is not, or these principles are not about making them easy for companies to do, or even possible if their regulations say they can't or have to do something else. But it's about principles that the policy should follow and promote as well as the companies. So
Yeah.
it's fine if they're at odds now.
Well, I will say that, Utah has made some, if you look at the Utah law, there's a lot of good things there.
Yeah.
And importantly, as compared to, say, GDPR, the government is basically saying we have to abide by these laws, which I thought was which is good. GDPR, the governments are exempt um, um, from the GDPR requirements. Um, where is this one? Oh, okay. Legibility and transparency. I've had at least one person say this should be legibility, not transparency. And then I've had others basically go, you should be doing a lot more, that it, needs to also be around open standards and organizations that, don't have, that aren't captured. Then everybody's going to argue about what is capture. Um, um, I mean, Lisa, you've been dealing in this intersection for longer than most of us. Any thoughts on what is transparency beyond just open source?
Yeah, I think open source and open standards are both good, surprisingly often in tension. And I think both of those are just tools for transparency. We wouldn't be able to get much more prescriptive about when to use which without going into incredible detail.
Yeah, I wrote up this article a while ago on that basically open source wasn't good enough anymore, and that that we needed greater accessibility. That to be truly open means that you have to be able to support collective choice and collaboration, and it needs diversity, and the strategy and needs to be there. And then I basically said, level zero is open source. Okay, you've started, you've made you're at the foot of the steps, but beyond that, is it really inspectable? Is it really observable? Can you really see what's going on? In the Git world, it would be, are you actually posting the bugs? Are you posting the feature requests, or is it all behind, a private branch? Is it reproducible? Is it testable? Is it cooperative? Are the roadmaps shared? Do you even listen to roadmaps? Do you even have a person assigned to listen to things? And then is it been distributed and or standardized? Yeah, I'll
This is great. I already forwarded this to my team, by the way, because we do open source, but not much more than level zero, which is just appropriate for us now. But a reminder that we're not doing it all. But yeah, taking this back to the transparency principle, I think the foundation of transparency is actually governance. And whether once you have the governance, any transparency of governance, then what you choose to build on top of that, whether it's open standards or open source or a wiki or, monthly webinars, transparency can be any and all of these things.
yeah. It's actually interesting. I had a discussion at IIW, which just a couple of us were at last week or week before, on, all is there a pattern language for governance, and what are all the different kinds of approaches and things of that nature. Let's see. Um, actually have a oddball. I'm a game designer, so sometimes I think in context of game design. So this is literally a cooperative game on, how do you cooperate better? If people know what Gnomic is, it's basically you can either play it in a competitive version or you can play it in the cooperative version. But how do you oops, let's see. Spectrum of consent. Where is there it is. I have this whole thing of, you know, um, pure unanimous consent, various kinds of uniform consent, consensus -1, consensus seeking, mediated, all the way to, you know, plurality, right to fork, citizen assembly, distributed authority, executive authority, and dictatorship, which, to a certain extent, sometimes works for a while. So anyhow, I'll send that link around. But yeah, the governance question or transparency of governance to at least know how. Actually, I'm going to throw one more. This is my definition of what is a participatory ecosystem. And like every word here is carefully crafted. That's something of an interest to people. It's a kind of an ecosystem point of view on things. So if we go to these here, obviously portability, they're saying that the existing principles enable transport of identity digital wallets and services, enable use to transfer their ideas to a new medium or new platforms. I think that's, was kind of from the previous. These are all existing ones. No, they didn't really add anything significantly new. Just some tweaks and improvements, consent, data minimization. Anyhow, this is maybe something, Otto, you might want to try to get, especially if you're going to be doing any more of the Asia Pacific calls. I think it'd be great to have the W3C people, have these people come in. I will say that some of these, looking through some of these, I might argue they're not necessarily self-sovereign. But that's to be said. Okay, well, we've spent almost an hour and a half going through these. I've got a recording. I'm going to start working on these. I mean, I think one of my biggest challenges is right now is, should I be making these shorter and then putting operational principles along the lines of these, as bullets under them? Is that going to be a better way of doing it? There certainly is a mishmash of things that can't be operationalized, and such in these. Any other kind of high level observations on this set?
Breaking things out into the pure principles versus what this might look like in practice sounds like a really rich approach. Allowing the principles to remain kind of like they're concentrated, like
Yeah,
like an espresso versus like a coffee cake. Like the good principle is concentrated and targeted, and then how this might play out in practice, how it's operationalized can be a lot more detail and maybe this, maybe that. So, but only you will know as the writer if it's starting to work.
Right. Any other kind of high level comments?
I mean, I think you're right. The detailed matrix from the folks from Tokyo is the right way to assess, and maybe they've been even willing to update their paper to match the new set of principles that come out, like a refreshed version of that, to fit in with that. But sorry, I cut off Gerald. Go ahead, Gerald.
No. My comment is very, very general. Just wanted to say I remain extremely grateful for everybody on the call and everybody that is spending time thinking about these things deeply, and putting their time and effort towards it. So thank you.
Yeah. One of the asks that I have is anybody willing to take on an edit pass, copy one of these, look at the CSSPS thing and just pick one and do a draft? Just from your perspective?
I'm happy to raise my hand for one of those, Mr. Allen.
Is there which are you leaning toward?
which are there specific ones that you think would benefit the most from a review? Obviously, you know my experience in terms of fit as well, but
Well,
yeah.
I'd be interested, maybe, especially given the you know, next week's conversations, is maybe on the minimalization side of things. And then I can also send you the IETF draft. Hold on, IETF. Um, let's see, Elision, Apple, Klein, Allen.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to take a look at that one, and I think that is something that I'm passionate about. So yeah.
Okay, so let's anybody want to tackle again, you know, it can just be integrating the existing comments, breaking it up into, you know, however you like. Um, anybody want to volunteer for persistence?
Let me ask my job if they'll let me do that.
Okay.
But I'll get back to you, yeah. If they'll let me. So it's just breaking it into the principles from the CCSPS paper and
Yeah, I
cleaning up
mean
the comments, right?
it's just, you know, to go back to this, you know, is there a shorter and sweeter, you know, version of it that captures it and moves the operational side of things to bullets underneath it somehow?
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so
Yeah, that should be.
uh, can I volunteer you, Lisa, for portability? I know
Um,
you're overwhelmed right now.
absolutely. But I suppose if it's a paragraph, I can manage it.
That would be great. So
When do you expect it by? Uh,
Um, well, that was going to be my next question was, you know, how often do we want to have these kinds of discussions? I was thinking, you know, in 3 or 4 weeks, if that's reasonable, depending on, you know, people's schedules and all that. Are people up to coming back in, you know, around you know, June 10th or something, you know, mid-June?
Works for me.
And is this a good time for people? I see a few thumbs up. Okay. So I'll get that formally on the calendar. Let's see. Uh
And how do you want those to come back at you?
Probably
In
just
the
as a
doc or as
yeah,
comments or in the notes?
just create a separate, just literally just copy this and into a new Google Doc
Yeah,
and share it with everybody. Maybe put the link in a comment.
great.
Um so we don't have one. So anybody volunteering for interoperability or transparency? Anybody want to tackle that? Um, well, okay. Well, we'll continue working on these, and maybe, you know, I'll be sharing of the transcript and progress on this. With the rest of the community. Maybe somebody who can't make this time zone really cares about it and will add themselves. That sounds good. So I'm gonna just quickly while I'm puzzling it while we're here, month, June. How about June 10th work for people? Any
I
problems?
might, yeah. A week after might be better for me.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say 10 p.m. Revisiting. I'll send out a more formal invite later. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you again very much for joining in on this call and the passion you bring to you know, digital human rights and dignity, and keep on plugging away on this over the summer, and hopefully have a really good, solid something to offer the community by the beginning of fall.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah.